Do this if you find yourself in a toxic relationship. I'm so excited to have our guest today, Dr. Nadine Macaluso.
You did
I got
it. You did it.
earlier. And for those that are watching, you may not know her, but if you saw the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, Dr. Nay was married to Jordan Belfort, who was a stockbroker and a financial criminal, I guess, and in a very narcissistic relationship. And Dr. Nadine eventually went on to become a therapist to help women who find themselves in a narcissistic relationship. So Dr. Nay, welcome to the channel.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you about this. So, well, let's just get into the nitty gritty, because you wrote a book called Run Like Hell, which I'm assuming relates to being in toxic relationships, and also not just to heal from a toxic relationship, but how to even avoid a toxic relationship. Am I right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So can you give us a little bit of your backstory, or I mean, which part do you think we should start with first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So, so I was in the quintessential trauma bond, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that back then, all those years ago,
Yeah.
but I was, unbeknownst to me. I met my ex-husband when I was very young. I was 22, 23. He was 28.
Okay.
And just like a trauma bond happens, it was tons of love bombing, tons of intensity, very fast paced. But then what happened, what originally started off as a fairy tale, and I thought I was, I met a unicorn.
Yeah.
Right. That I met the best thing in the world. As what happens in a trauma bond, his mask fell. And I say that you start off with Romeo, you end up with Dirty John in these relationships.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I was living with someone who was abusive and addicted to drugs. And I was totally confused and afraid.
So how did you so you were much younger, you weren't educated the way you are, you didn't know anything about this. And I suspect a lot of people find themselves in this circumstance. How did you navigate that on an emotional level? I mean, it must have been very challenging.
Well, the second I met him, I put myself into therapy.
Okay.
Yeah, even though it was all so many years ago, 25 years ago, nobody was like doing therapy really. I mean, people were doing therapy, weren't talking about it, right? It wasn't as much in the zeitgeist. Yeah. But I knew I couldn't manage him, couldn't manage my lifestyle. I didn't know what it was like to have butlers and limo drivers. I grew up a single mother in Brooklyn. And so I put myself right into therapy so that I could manage this crazy life I had.
Okay. Well, now that took a lot of not only just courage, I would assume, but it took a fair amount of self-awareness to go and say, I need help. And I think a lot of people probably don't do that. I'm sure times have changed too.
Yeah. So. I'm very blessed in the sense I grew up with a mother who was very psychologically oriented. In the 70s, she was reading Freud and Jung, and we always talked about our feelings. So I grew up in a very open, progressive household like that. And so that sort of self-exploration, self-actualization, self-awareness was really promoted in my family. Okay. It was something that we really value.
Yeah. So, but correct me if I'm wrong. One of the fundamentals when you're dealing with a narcissist or anyone who's got that kind of behavior, overly selfish behavior, is setting up boundaries. But I suspect you were learning about boundaries from your therapist. But was that even working at that time?
No. And actually, that is a very important piece of when you meet somebody, right? Do they allow you to have boundaries?
Yeah.
And he did not allow me to have boundaries. In fact, this sort of personality really is into boundary erosion.
Okay.
They want to erode your boundaries, actually. Okay. And my therapist wasn't talking to me about boundaries back then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't until I left him much later that I went to a treatment center called the Karen Foundation in Pennsylvania that I learned about boundaries. I learned that I could say no, because there's no way you can have a boundary with this person.
Well, that fascinates me. And again, I'm naive here, so give me a little bit of a break. But so what did just out of curiosity, what was your therapist telling you at that time?
I think honestly, she was really just providing a very safe space for me to go and talk for 50 minutes and without judgment. Because you have to remember when, I was with Jordan, he's the kingpin, he controls everybody.
Yeah.
he's large and in charge. And so even all of our friends really are controlled by him, right?
Yeah.
So she was just really, I think, a very safe space for me to go and be my authentic self and express my authentic feelings so I wouldn't
Yeah.
lose my mind.
Okay.
And she certainly helped me manage it, but I don't think back then we didn't use as much psychoeducation in therapy as we do today.
Okay. Okay. So just even that reflection, and now that you're a therapist and you specialize in this area, if you kind of reflect back, there are, or if I'm understanding this correctly, there are a lot more tools a person can use when they find themselves in a toxic relationship, when they're working with a professional like yourself or someone who specializes in this. So I'm just curious. Okay, so let's kind of fast forward, the divorce.
Yeah.
When did you become a therapist, and to the extent that he was a catalyst for that, can you kind of walk us through that period of your life?
Yeah. So I left him when he got arrested.
Okay.
He got arrested on 11 counts of money laundering.
Okay.
And so I left him because I knew I could be safe.
Yeah.
I was like, there's my window. I'm taking it and I'm out.
Yeah.
And so I left him. And then about 2 years later, I met my current husband, and he lived in California. So I picked up my children and we moved to California.
Okay. Okay.
Which was great. And then I went back to school at 38 to get my
Okay.
master's because I was in the garment business and there's so much ageism in it. And I was like, you know what? Therapy saved my life. I'm going to go back to school to be a therapist. I love to learn. I'm such a nerd.
Yeah.
I love to read. And so I went back to school, got my master's and my doctorate. But as that was happening, when he went to jail, he wrote the book, The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yes.
And then 2 years before I finished my doctorate was when the movie came out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that
Wow.
was fun.
By the way, I'll be candid with you. I love that movie. I mean,
No,
I love
it's a great
Leonardo
movie. It's a
DiCaprio.
great movie. It's a cult icon. It's a great movie.
How did it feel to have Margot Robbie play you?
Well, I always say, like everything in life, it's a double-edged sword. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a terrible thing to have the most beautiful woman in the world who's 20 years younger to portray you, so you're constantly compared to her.
Oh,
But it's
well, you're a
okay.
beautiful lady.
It's okay. She was great. She was young.
Yeah.
But it was, but I enjoyed the movie. I thought she did a great job. I met her so that she could get my Brooklyn accent.
Okay.
Yeah, but I had no say in the movie. It was not my creative input and I made no money.
Yeah. Well, but to the extent that we got like a glimpse of his personality, I suspect that when you're actually in that environment, it is way more intense to be with someone who basically, I mean, does a narcissistic person just live in their own silo? I mean,
yes, completely.
Okay.
Yeah, completely. That's a great way to say it. They live in their own silo. And it was crazy because, the movie's very funny, right? Because Jordan wrote the book in a very, funny, comedic way. But it wasn't funny. Listen, were there fun times? Of course. Was the lifestyle, extravagant lifestyle fun? Of course. But that didn't make up for the terror that I often felt inside because of his rage, because of his threats. He's very dominating, very intimidating, and, and a severe drug addict. And I had never dealt with that. I didn't know what the hell to do, as a young girl. And I, as a young woman, I was like, oh, if I love him enough, all these kind of things that I wasn't trained to know about. But yeah, it was very, very, very challenging to live with him.
It'd been interesting, not that Hollywood have done this, but if they did that storyline and then your storyline at the same time, what a contrast that would be. And
what a contrast. Yes. And the ironic thing is, like in the movie, he shows me throwing water in his face. Like, I'm the aggressive one. I never did that.
Okay.
So that's the funny part, is that in the movie, I'm always mad at him and yelling at him, when he was always mad at me. And that doesn't mean we didn't fight, because I would have something called reactive abuse, where I would react back to him.
Okay.
But in a trauma bond, what makes it so toxic is that the pathological partner wants power and control over their lover.
Okay.
So then the other partner, tries to fight back for their autonomy.
Do they? Oh, just something just occurred to me while you were just saying this. Does the narcissistic partner do they get off on you getting upset? Is there some sort of like, there's almost a sadistic attraction to their partner being upset at them all the time? Is that any of that going on? I'm
I
curious.
don't know if that's it. I think that they feel entitled to their rage,
Okay. Okay.
and they really just don't care how it affects you. I don't
Hmm.
know if I wouldn't say he got off on it. I just don't think he cared. He
Okay.
was like, it's
Okay.
my way, the highway. You have to do it my way. If you're not a good soldier and in line, you get decimated.
Yeah. Well, let's shift now to, you became a therapist. Now you actually help people in this
Yes,
area, right?
yes, I
Like,
do.
and you are actually one of the premier specialists in this area. I mean, from what I've did a little
Yeah.
bit of research on you. So walk me through when a client comes to you, and maybe if it's okay without crossing any boundaries for clients, share with us kind of what you do to help someone when they find themselves in a toxic relationship.
Yeah. So usually by the time they land on my Zoom, right,
Okay.
they know that they're in a trauma bond, right? Or
Okay.
they've left a trauma bond. So let's say if they're still in one, I really just listen to them, validate them, and give them tons of psychoeducation about what they're experiencing.
Okay.
That a trauma bond has to have a power imbalance. It has to have intermittent reinforcement, meaning 70% of the time the pathological partner is cruel, controlling, 30% of the time they're kind and nice. That's
Okay.
why you get stuck, because hope is the hook. So I
Wait,
spend a
say
lot.
that again. So there's a 70%.
Yeah. It was 60-40,
Yeah, yeah.
70-30,
I'm not
80-20,
splitting hairs here.
where they're more dirty John. So they're lying, they're controlling, they're betraying, they're
Okay.
exploiting. Then that 30% of the time when they're kind, generous, and helpful,
Yeah.
that's what keeps you hooked.
Okay.
Because you're like, let's say you get into a huge big fight with them, with Dirty John, but then Romeo comes back around, and you're like, oh, there he is. There he is. That's the guy I fell in love with.
Okay.
So I really give them tons of psychoeducation about what they're in, right?
Okay.
And I really work with their shame, because a lot of times there's so much shame when you're
Okay.
in a trauma bond. So I really work with them on teaching them about self-compassion. And I deal with their complex PTSD symptoms,
Okay.
right? So they have loss of self,
Yeah.
cognitive dissonance, and CPTSD.
Okay.
So what I do is I give them tons of assessments,
Okay.
because I want them to know about their personality traits. I want them to understand about their developmental trauma and their attachment patterns.
Okay.
And I say, after I give them education about this partner, enough about them.
Okay.
Turn the mirror back on you.
Okay.
Who are you? What do you need? What do you want? How do we empower you so you can leave if you haven't left, and then to heal, because healing is possible.
So, okay, I like this. I mean, I had no idea this, but you start with kind of an understanding from a human behavior perspective of
Yeah.
how they, and this is true for men or women. It's not singular
That's
to men
right.
in this particular case. But first, understanding their behavior, and then coming to a place of being the mirror for them to look at their own reaction, helping them set up boundaries, helping them
Yes.
navigate this experience. And then what was the third piece? I didn't write it down.
And then I give them tons of assessments, because I turn the mirror back on them, because when you're in this trauma bond, you're so obsessed with this partner.
Yeah.
So I say, okay, enough with the obsession about them. Who are you? What do you need? What do you want? Because you lose yourself in a trauma bond.
Okay.
You can't have autonomy.
So you were very young when this happened to you. I would think, okay, and I'm curious, and maybe this is just an naive way of looking at it from my vantage point, but if you find yourself, you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, which is predominantly my demographic that I talk to, would you think that that person's with more life experience and more, hopefully, sovereignty wouldn't accept that behavior? Or is it just somewhat, is a person, or there's some people who are more susceptible to it than others? I'm curious about that.
Really, everybody is susceptible to a con artist.
Okay. Okay.
Everybody's susceptible to a con artist. And so that's why I wrote my book, because education is the only way to protect ourselves from these
Yeah.
people, right? And I have so many women that have been in these trauma bonds for 20 years, 30 years, just coming to therapy. I
Okay.
work with women in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they leave and they do rebuild their lives.
Okay. And so how do you, what's some of the, okay, so once they've come to a point where they've ended the relationship, I don't think therapy ends right at that point just
No.
because they ended the relationship. There needs to be some sort of integration into their own sovereignty, into their own
Yes.
life. And actually, back out in the dating marketplace, that can be kind of scary for a person who might have spent 5, 10, 20, or even 30 years with someone who
Oh,
might be in a
sure.
toxic dynamic, a trauma bond, as you said.
Yeah, because how do you trust again?
Yeah.
Right. So that's why the work is teaching them to trust themselves.
Okay. And I love that. But, and I'm always curious, how do you actually teach that? Because that's really not an easy thing.
You know, I can give, yeah,
person.
I can give you an example. So there's a woman, because I think examples illuminate things. So I was working with a woman for a few months, and she was in my Thriver community, and I had a session with her the other day, and she's dating. And she said to me, you know, I met this guy. He was really charming. I really liked him. She said, but there were some things now that started to stick out for me.
Yeah.
She was like, you know, we parked the car and he stayed in the car for like 20 minutes while I was waiting for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
That's odd. Just in
Right.
general, as a
Right.
dating
She was
coach,
like, that's odd. And then
Yeah.
he did one other thing, and she trusted her gut, and she put him up on that website, that dating site. Are we dating the same guy? Or she went to check, and 2 people, or more, like, so all these people had all these comments about him.
Yeah.
Right. And so she confronts him about it, and he gaslit her.
Okay.
And so she knew, because of all her education, even though she did really like the guy, they had great sexual chemistry.
Yeah.
She was like, he's a liar. Like, I can't do this. And so she didn't break up with him. And she broke up with him, and she was kind of upset at herself. I said, but it was 2 months, not 2 years.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, here's the thing, though. And, you know, we talked about this before we turned on the camera. You know, I think to some degree, particularly in midlife, we do have kind of an emotionally dysfunctional demographic out in the marketplace. And I can speak from personal experience. You know, I've gone through a divorce. I went through alimony, child support, visitation rights. I went through a lot of dating experiences. And I found myself rather dysfunctional, oftentimes giving mixed signals for someone, but it wasn't coming from a disingenuous place. It's just, I think there's a lot of confusion when a person hasn't done personal development, self-help, spiritual work, and therapy.
Yes.
And my whole channel is all about promoting those modalities for people to enter into this dynamic, because human behavior and human relationships are not for the faint of heart, by the way.
They're not. They're not. I always say to people, that's why I got my PhD, just to deal with my family.
Oh, really? Your family, right?
You know, just like my kids, my stepkids, my ex, my husband's exes, you know. And I agree. There's a lot of children running around in adult bodies.
Yeah. Now, you said something earlier. You called it Thriver.
Thriver, yes.
So can you talk to us about that? Because I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, so that's just a term that I read in a very old book. I can't even remember, unfortunately. I'm looking to find out where I referenced it from, but I can never find it. And it's just a mixture of surviving and thriving.
Okay.
Right. So a lot of times when you've been in such a toxic relationship, or as you know, right, you got divorced, and yours wasn't even a trauma bond. But so you can imagine afterwards how it just devastated you feel.
Yeah.
But when you overcome all of that, I believe, and the research shows this, you can have post-traumatic growth. 75% of people who actually experience relational trauma, such as a trauma bond or intimate partner violence, go on to become better versions of themselves. So I call us Thrivers.
Okay. Okay. Well, I like that. I like the way you're framing that. You know, interesting as I look back at my own experiences, you know, and many of the people that follow my channel have had multiple relationships, not necessarily with narcissists, but when
Yeah,
you're just going through garden variety divorce, when you go through a breakup of a treasured relationship,
yeah,
I know I found myself in a circumstance where I was in a relationship where I really cared for someone. It didn't work out. And sometimes two people aren't a fit for one another.
right.
But it took me a lot of time to actually even just navigate the emotional. I want to be careful. I was going to say the word pain, but the detachment from the attachment to that person. You
Yes,
know, you can get attached to a person that is a good person. It's not necessarily have to be a
right.
narcissistic person or someone who is bad, but you're attached to someone, and just detaching from someone. I know even in my own life has caused me to go through
Sure.
a lot of confusion, a lot of pain, not because it was bad, but because it's just it hurts to get
Yeah, yeah,
attached to someone
sure,
and lose
sure,
them. So
sure. Listen, attachment is real. I mean, if
yeah.
we didn't attach to our mothers, we couldn't survive.
Yeah, no doubt.
Right? So attachment, Freud discovered that attachment is more important than food. And
Okay.
so that's why it's so hard, and let's say you have anxious attachment and you're dating somebody with avoidant attachment, right? So you're leaning in all the time. You want closeness, they want
Yeah.
distance, and then you take it personally and then you react and then it pushes them away more.
Yeah, yeah,
And then you react and then it pushes them away more,
yeah, yeah.
right? But if everybody just understands, hey, that's his attachment pattern or her attachment pattern, I don't need to take it personally. And I need to also learn how to soothe my anxious attachment.
Yeah.
Right? So just those two little pieces of information can change our whole relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know for a fact that my attachment style is anxious. I mean, I
Okay.
would like to say I'm a recovering, and I'd like to hope that it's default. But you know,
Yeah.
it's interesting. In the past, I had a propensity of choosing avoidant attachment styles. But
Yes.
it's also interesting that the minute you're with someone who's either secure or attached, it's funny how an anxious can kind of turn the other way or
Yeah.
become more of avoidant when
Yes.
they're with that opposite attachment
Yes.
style.
Yes. Because it can be very fluid. I mean, I was avoidant,
Okay,
right?
okay,
So, and my current husband is more anxious, right? So
okay.
opposites usually do attract. But
Yeah,
we figured it out now
yeah,
because he would have deep fear of abandonment. And I'm like,
yeah.
I'm not going anywhere. Finally, 25 years later, he believes me.
Mm. You know, it's interesting. I had Thais Gibson, who's kind of one of the leading podcasters on attachment theory, and she was on sharing that she's an avoidant and
Yeah.
her husband is an anxious.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I actually believe that if an avoidant is a therapist, they actually are like probably the only avoidant you want to be with, because
Yeah.
at least they are aware and recognize that they kind of withdraw. I'm going to use the
Yes.
word withhold love,
Yeah,
not from
they'll
an intention.
withdraw, but yeah, are more
Yeah,
self-contained, are more
yeah,
self-reliant,
yeah.
right? Yes, for sure, for sure, yes.
By the way, really quickly, I'm going to take a quick break for everyone who's watching. If you have a question for Dr. Nair or myself, there's a little chat box in the corner. Write the word question or post the question and post the question thereafter. Or you can purchase a super sticker, super chat. There's a little $sign in the chat box. All the monies from the super sticker, super chat goes to a scholarship fund in the name of my son, Connor Asley. That's a picture of him right there. It's my son who passed away over 7 years ago. In his honor, we donate to causes like the Hoffman Process, Insight Institute, and scholarships to coaching as well. So just remember that little
Beautiful.
$sign. Oh, you probably weren't aware of that.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to throw it on you like that.
no, that's okay. I
Yeah.
can hold it. I can
Yeah.
hold it.
Yeah.
I
So
can
I started, I collect money and I donate it to things
That's
that I
beautiful.
matter to me.
That's beautiful tribute. Yes.
Okay. Well, we do have a question that came in from Lisa. So let's see what she says. She
Okay.
says, "What is trauma bond? Can I have this with my mother? I know I had this with my last boyfriend." So, Dr. Nay, can you elaborate on that
Yeah,
for us?
sure. So a trauma bond is a toxic dysfunctional relationship between two emotionally attached people, right?
Okay.
You're not going to have it with the cashier at your market store
Okay.
because you have to be attached to the person. And what happens in this relationship is that one person wants power and control over the other person.
Okay.
And as I said, you have to have a power imbalance. So you could certainly have it with your mother because your mother had the power when you were a
Okay.
child, right? And so what happens is that maybe she was belittling you, maybe she was criticizing you, maybe she neglected you. You know, I don't know exactly what happened, but yes, you can certainly have it with your mother due to that power imbalance. And parents can give love like that, where they can be really, really, really nice and then really very cruel.
Yeah.
So you can have it with your mother. And I'm sorry you had it with two people in your life.
Yeah. So coming back to trauma bond, does that mean, I mean, God, I want to say this without it sound like a victim shaming or whatnot, but I've read where, like, for example, narcissistic people tend to prey on people who have weaker emotional acuity or something like that. And again, I don't want to say it in that way, but maybe you can elaborate on where you think I'm going with that.
Yeah. So actually, so this is interesting. And this is in 2018, I read an amazing book called Women Who Love Psychopaths. Okay.
Okay.
Crazy title, but it's not Dr. Sandra Brown. She did tons of research on women who end up in trauma bonds. And so we always thought of it more like women in the domestic violence shelter, right?
Okay.
We would think they had learned helplessness. We would say they're love addicts. So she really turned the head on all this research. And she did something where she measured their personalities using something called the 5-factor model of personality.
Okay.
Okay. And what she discovered is that women who are perfect prey for trauma bonds score very high in agreeableness.
Okay.
They're very loyal, tolerant, compliant, very pro-relational, pro-social. And they're very conscientious, meaning they're very driven, organized, and have integrity, which are beautiful traits.
Yeah.
But when you're with a narcissist, guess what they do? They weaponize them.
Okay.
So some people have developmental trauma.
Okay.
And that's why they pick somebody similar to their parent.
Okay.
But some people don't. Like me, I wasn't abused. I probably was neglected. My parents were 19 and 20, right?
Okay.
But I was never abused or spoken to cruelly or hit or any of that. And I still ended up in a trauma bond.
Okay.
So really anybody and everybody can end up in one, but it's really important to understand your personality traits.
Okay. So, something just occurred to me. I'm going to go like a squirrel for a second. So, I'm just curious because you have a couple children, correct?
Yes.
I'm curious. Have you educated your children on being prepared for a relationship?
Yes. Well, first of all, my daughter's a therapist. Okay.
Okay. Well, that kind of explains everything.
Yeah, my daughter's a therapist. My
Okay.
son is 29. Oh my God, he's going to
Okay.
be 30. I can't believe it. And yes, they're both very educated about it. That doesn't mean that they don't have their challenges with it.
Okay.
Of course they do. I think my son is more like me.
Yeah.
So maybe a little bit more in the people pleasing, less boundaries
Okay.
land. And so
Okay.
he's working on that. But yeah, no, I believe, to me, this is what I said: reading, writing, arithmetic.
Okay.
Why don't we teach the other R, relationships, in school?
That was my point of bringing this up. I mean, literally, like, I think there's such an under education from both parents. I don't know if schools should teach it or not, but like we learned the birds and the bees at school.
Right.
I remember back in the 70s or 60s when I was growing up, 60s or 70s.
Yeah.
By the way, really quickly, my son is now going off to get his doctorate in psychology.
Oh,
So
look at
he's
that.
29. He'll be 29 this week.
Oh, good for him. Good
So
for him.
I'm kind of happy about that. I indoctrinated him when he was younger into Tony Robbins, Wayne Dyer, every personal development book I could
Yes.
read. I was like indoctrinating him.
Yes.
But I don't believe there's just enough real education. And when
There's
you
not.
said something earlier that I wanted to touch upon, you said that one particular client, might
Yeah.
have been in a 20-year toxic relationship, trauma bond. And the next time she found herself in some circumstance that didn't feel right,
Yeah.
she ended it within 2 months
Yes.
instead of 2 years and 20
Right.
years.
That's right.
So, like, to the extent that now, what advice do you give people that haven't been in a trauma bond, like from a way to avoid it even going forward, or even how to pick that up while you're in the dating process?
Yeah. So there are a few things you need to look for. First of all, you start to date this person. Listen, it's very hard to figure out these people on the first date because they're the most charming people usually in the world.
Okay.
Right? Listen, if they were jerks on the first date, we wouldn't even fall in love with them.
Yeah.
So, so they're very, very charming. So on the first date, it can be really tough. But a few things. If you notice that they don't respect your boundaries.
Yeah.
If they want to see you, like I had another woman who I worked with, and she said she met this guy in a dating app and he wanted to FaceTime with her every night. And she was like, I don't want to do that. I just met you. And he had a really hard time with it. She was like, bye-bye. Okay. So do they respect your boundaries? Do they give you the space to be who you really are? And do their words and match their actions?
Yeah.
Right. And then one other trick that my girls tell me, because I find everything out for my girls, they said, do they tell you the same stories over and over again? Because if they do, that means that they're just used to telling all these stories on a lot of dates.
Okay. By the way, in all fairness, and I only say this because I found myself in these circumstances, there's an interesting line between love bombing and getting really excited about someone that you
for sure.
And sometimes I found myself in limerence or lust. And certainly when, we men have a propensity when we're attracted to someone, we'll go after them like, like a bull in a china shop. But I do recognize that it's not something you're going to see per se on the first or second date.
You're not.
And really quickly, RM Bells just posted a comment. She's asked, is love bombing always a contributing factor in the beginning of a trauma bond? Ooh, that's an interesting question.
Yes. I mean, there's different levels of love bomb. There's different ways you can love bomb somebody, right?
Okay.
You can give them tons of flowers, give them tons of gifts. Or you can just text them and call them 24/7.
Okay.
Right? Become like obsessed with them like that.
Yeah.
Or need to see them all the time, or just drop by, without letting them know, just because they want to give you something. So It doesn't always just have to be gifts or money or fancy things. It can be with too much attention too soon.
Okay.
And because you don't fall in love with somebody in 2 weeks. If somebody tells you in 2 weeks that they're your soulmate, I mean, run like hell. Like it's just not possible. And I say it this way. If it feels too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah. I was listening to a Marianne Williamson lecture once, and she was talking about what happens when there's almost too much intense chemistry on a first date. And then the audience screamed, like she goes, okay, audience, what's the answer to that? And she says, pray. Like you got to pray for your life.
Yeah.
Because it is so intoxicating to find yourself in a circumstance when there's intense chemistry. And I've learned the hard way, intense chemistry usually means I'm getting set up for a trauma bond with somebody.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this a little bit tongue in cheek.
No, but it really is. So I always say intensity is not intimacy.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Intensity is not intimacy. And, and this is something I talk about on my channel frequently, because I find people in the universe that I'm in, a lot of people get attached to someone in a long distance dynamic. They get attached to someone where they've never even spoken to them on the phone. It's just a photograph, and they've been love bombed by somebody through their Facebook page or their dating site or whatnot.
Right.
And they get radically attached to someone. I always say it is through a variety of different experiences and circumstances that you actually get to know another person.
I like that.
It's doing social activities, hobbies, mutual interests. It is through those experiences. And also, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is I even have one client who found herself in a narcissistic circumstance. She got married to someone because she just got caught up in that whole experience. Now she says, I have everybody go through my committee of friends
Right.
All of my friends have to interview somebody before I even remotely consider someone. I'm
Yeah,
curious
that's
on
good.
your thoughts on that.
I think that's great. I love that. I love that idea of different circumstances and seeing how they behave, right? How are
Yeah.
they at a party? How do they behave at a bar, right?
Yeah.
So they have 10 drinks. I mean, of course, how do they go on a hike? And then, yeah, introducing them to people and what the people closest to you, what sort of vibe they get.
Yeah. Hey, we've got another question that came in from
Yes.
Stacy. Let's hear what she has to say. How to embrace the mindset of enjoying the dating process.
Okay.
Oh, I like this, because if we kind of go in with this energy of fear, how
Yeah.
can we really
So
enjoy
what,
it?
so that's a great question, Stacey. So this is what I say to all my young girls.
Okay.
I say, or all my women, you're in a relational lab. Take the pressure off.
Okay.
This is all just an experiment.
Hmm.
Go into it with an open mind, and you're in a relational lab. Don't put so much pressure like, I got to meet the one. I got to meet. No, you know what? You might meet a few interesting people in the meantime of meeting the one that you end up with.
Yeah.
And that to not put so much pressure on yourself. And I find the words, they love that when I say you're in a relational lab. Like, oh, yeah, okay, I could do that.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. I think you almost need a PhD in human behavior to be to date these days. I mean, just to figure out a person's, emotional acuity, their emotional maturity and whatnot.
Yeah.
Why do you think it was? I'm just curious, and I'm throwing a curveball at you. Why do you think life was different 100 years ago versus today, or was it even different 100 years ago?
I think human nature has pretty much always been the same.
Yeah.
I think the dark, negative people are just getting exposed more now. But also,
Okay.
I think that technology and dating apps has changed the dating game because,
Yeah.
people that are narcissistic, they can procure any type of image on this app
Yeah.
that is not one bit based in who they are, just to entrap you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm in full agreement. And by the way, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar enough with swipe apps, where you just going like this and going like
Yes, yeah. I
that.
mean, I haven't used them, but I know just from my people, but I'm
Yeah.
not done it
And
myself.
I think it's caused us to almost marginalize people. I was thinking back to when, I met my now ex-wife, but which was 35 years ago now. It's hard to believe. But it was a whole different world 35 years ago versus
Yes.
now. We almost look at people as a commodity.
Yes.
And also there's this false sense that, oh, if it doesn't work with one person, you can just swipe and have another person land
Yeah.
on your lap.
Yeah.
That didn't exist, 20, 25 years ago.
No, it's just much more objectified, right? We're just
Yeah.
seeing people much more as objects than as like people with hearts and souls and brains and histories. And yeah.
Okay, Stacy just popped in with another question, so let's see what she has to say. When single, should one focus all their energy on living their best life, growing, learning passions, or some energy on dating, which seems to consume energy and distract? Yeah.
I think, Stacey, it depends upon what your goals are.
Yeah.
If your goal is to meet a partner, you're going to have to focus on dating.
Yeah.
Right? There's just no way, nobody's going to come knocking on anybody's door. Right. So I think two things can happen at once. I think you can focus on yourself and your passions and your hobbies and be really connected to your authentic self and still date, because again, if your goal is to meet a partner, you're going to have to take steps towards that goal.
By the way, RM Bells just said Dr. Nadine is great guest. I'd like to buy her book. Folks, her book, Run Like Hell. I'm going to post it in my Jonathan Recommend books listed below. Just go to that link. I'll post her book on there, or you can go to Amazon, I'm assuming.
Yep,
or
it's
other
at
places.
Amazon. Yep, it's on Amazon. Yep.
I'm just curious. Give us a sneak peek. What's the book? Is the book about your relationship, or is it?
No. The book is about trauma bonds, what they are, who the people are that end up in them, the symptoms you get, and how to heal and how to find healthy love.
Okay. So this would be a great book for someone that's either in that type of dynamic, but more importantly, I believe coming back to what we talked about earlier is educating ourselves
Oh, yes.
before we go into this relationship lab.
Yes,
So
it's so important. I mean, I try to give out like a few books a week. And
yeah.
whenever I'm like getting my nails done and my hair done, and I have these young girls, I'm like, read this, read this, right? But women of all ages read it. Women of all ages tell me that it's a game changer.
Yeah.
It's filled with research, but it's filled with clinical. So I take 4 trauma bonded couples and I weave their stories throughout the material, the clinical material. So it's not boring. And the stories are very juicy.
Oh, okay. When are they going to make a movie on it?
No, I don't know. Well, I mean, we see trauma bonds every single day. I mean, we see P. Diddy and Cassie, the biggest trauma bond.
Oh, God, yeah. I was just talking about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard earlier today.
Right.
Talk about another dysfunctional dynamic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, romantic relationships can make us crazy.
Yeah. So we have JoJo that posted a question, and they ask, what advice would you give a guy who has a woman he met off of a dating website who moved into his house 2 months after first meeting him? She's still there over a year later.
Wow. Okay. So 2 months is quick.
Yeah.
I would say that that's quick because you don't really know the person. And I don't know. What's the rush?
You know, it's interesting. I had a guest on, Laurel House, who's a dating coach, and she said she's noticed a new trend with people. And this happened during COVID. I don't know if you're aware of this, but people were moving in together rather quickly.
Oh, yeah, there was a term. There was a term that came for it. Damn, yeah. I forgot.
And I actually, as I'm saying it out loud, I forget what it is.
Right. So remember, there was a term that happened during COVID.
Yeah.
Oh, I get it, because like everybody's stuck at home. You don't want to be stuck at home alone.
Yeah.
I understand that, but we're not, I just think for somebody to move in 2 months is quick.
Well, there's always the exception to the rule. You've heard stories, 50 years ago where that happened. In fact, it's kind of interesting, 100 years ago, people met, fell in love, and got married all inside of 2 weeks, and could have been married for, 50, 60 years. I think in today's environment, depending on their circumstances, particularly, Dr. Nadine, for the demographic that I speak to, which is the over 45 crowd, which is roughly 75%, and this is anecdotal on my part, that are divorced, have had multiple relationships, I think it effectively takes more time to actually get to know another person. And so I like your term relationship lab is looking at this. By the way, you may not be aware of this, but I jokingly say, and again, I say it jokingly, we need to interrogate people in dating. And what I mean by interrogate means get to the truth. And I think if we go in naively only about entertainment, romance, and physical connection without really assessing compatibility, I think that's the naive point. And most likely what you taught your children at a much younger age is that we need to be thinking about this.
It's, what it is? Disney did us wrong. And, ain't no prince coming. Nobody's coming to save us, right? But we've been fed these myths about romantic love. Yeah. And they're just not real.
Yeah. By the way, we have another, RM Bell says, can you give us a few more examples of famous trauma bond? Oh, I'm kind of curious because I don't follow it as much.
Let me think. I know that there's a lot in the reality TV world.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't watch The Valley, but I do love the Housewives of Beverly Hills and all.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think that Teresa Giudice and Louis are in a trauma bond, if anybody knows who they are. I don't know. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I think because I'm just so obsessed with P. Diddy and Cassie right now.
Okay.
They're like consumed in my brain. But I've
We've got some people chiming in.
oh good. Eminem and
Kim.
Kim. There we
Okay.
go.
Let's see,
Yeah.
Kanye and Bianca.
Oh well, yes, thank you. Oh my God, I did a whole post about
See, I
that.
don't follow any of this.
Oh shit, that's the worst. Tina and Ike for
Okay.
sure.
Oh yeah, Tina Turner and Ike.
Yes,
Oh, sure,
but
that is
Kanye
a classic one.
Yeah, Kanye and Bianca.
Oh.
That's so sad. And again, you know, that's all about control. That's coercive control. He's controlling her.
Yeah. I'm more obsessed with 90 Day Fiance.
Okay, so you like those.
Well, I like the dating related things.
Yeah,
like
that
Love
makes
is
sense because
Blind
that's
and
what
that
you
sort of-
do. Yeah, that's what you do. Yeah, I know. And Love Island, right? Isn't that a good one?
Yeah, that's kind of a good one. I'm still the only reason why I watch 90 Day Fiance. I happen to be, my heritage is Turkish. My parents were from Istanbul, Turkey, and there's this Turkish man with this woman who's lived in Los Angeles, and I'm just obsessed with their story.
Oh, that's funny. Huh? Yeah, yeah.
But it's kind of interesting to watch reality TV because it's almost like watching a train wreck in real time in many of these cases.
Yes, no, it is. That's why I love reality TV. It's my guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
I work hard and then I put it on and just veg out.
Lynn just says, I love you both. What an amazing conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, let me think of something else. Well, we can keep going if it's up to, depending on your time. But I'm kind of I want to bring up this show, Love is Blind, for a second. Have you ever watched it?
They're behind the thing.
They're behind a screen.
Yes, they're behind the screens. Yes.
And the idea is that they're getting to know each other outside of the physical realm.
Right, without seeing each other.
Yeah. But you know what's fascinating, and to some degree, it's like getting addicted to a long distance dating dynamic. I mean, to some degree, even though there's photographs or sometimes FaceTime and that involved, is that they kind of go through an accelerated learning curve. And I'd like your take on this, and give me about a minute to kind of illustrate this for you.
Yeah.
So they spend these 10 days in these cubicles getting to know one another. They meet, they go on effectively a honeymoon, or they go on a vacation together, and then they live together for anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. It used to be much longer in the beginning of the series. One of the reasons why I like this.
So they go on a honeymoon before they live with each other?
Yeah, they go on kind of an effective honeymoon. They don't get married, but they get engaged. But they go on a vacation.
After they pick each other, after they
pick
listen
each
to
other.
each other. Then they get to see the person.
Yeah.
They go on a honeymoon and then they live together. Okay.
Yeah. And I say a honeymoon, they go on a vacation.
Okay.
Now, what they're doing is an accelerated learning. But what I like about it is see, our current dating environment is a very drawn out version to get to know someone. And I mean, it's date after date after date after date. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's been our historic way. But when you're in this kind of relationship lab, you're in this love lab, if you will, it kind of accelerates getting to know this person. And I'm not advocating people live together after, a week of knowing each other kind of thing.
Right.
But there's some benefit to it because there's an intentionality, like there is a goal. Like, look, we have to decide if we're going to get married in 4 to 5 weeks from the time we started this whole process. I like that there's at least an intentionality involved.
Yes. That one, and their intentionality for both partners is clear.
Yes, exactly. Now, a lot of people go into with false pretenses, and these days people are going in, just because they want to become social media celebrities and that sort of thing.
Right. I get that.
Which is kind of interesting. Did you by any chance watch The Golden Bachelor or The Golden Bachelorette?
Yes.
And what did you think of that?
Well, I watched the first one with Jerry.
We don't know if it's Gary or Jerry. He was the one guy that had a weird name.
I thought it was interesting. I mean, they didn't make it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. They got married literally a few weeks later, but you know what they did wrong? Well, when I say did wrong, they really didn't blend their lives together. That's
why it failed. Neither one of them wanted to do that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, you have to make sacrifices. I mean, you have to compromise. And I think they were both maybe older and more rigid, or more, and listen, they were both connected to their families. I
Yeah.
understand, but neither one of them wanted to move away from their families,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And
So they didn't talk about that before.
no, that's where this show, and this is where reality TV kind of irritates me, because, and not that ABC is responsible for this or whatnot, but to some degree, you have to recognize at midlife, and again, that's the demographic I speak to, blending lives is one of the most crucial factors to consider when you're considering a mate. And just because you have attraction towards them and you have all this chemistry and whatnot, ultimately, if you can't put your lives together, it's not going to work out in the long run.
That's right.
So, here's someone. Jack just posted something. He says, "Isn't dating inherently objectifying because you're choosing people based on superficial features?"
It can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But a lot of times, you can't read a book by its cover.
Yeah, that's why. Why? By the way, I jokingly say this. Do you know why it's called dating?
Why?
Because holy fucking shit, trying to figure out another human being was taken in the dictionary. Well, Dr. Nadine, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on to share a bit of your story, to help people kind of avoid those toxic relationships and what should they do when they find themselves. I know let's just talk about your book for one more second before we wrap up.
Sure. So if you can find me on Instagram at The Real Dr. Nadine. I post every single day.
Yeah,
my social
I'll
media
post the link below.
My social media is wild. You never know what's going to come out of this mouth.
Okay.
And you can go to my website, drnae.com, and you can get tons of free resources, all the assessments I spoke about, the worksheets. You can order a signed copy of my book there. And also there, if you have been in a trauma bond and you're healing, I have an online survivor community that you can join. So there's a lot of different ways to reach me, connect with me. But yeah.
Oh, well, Dr. Nadine, thank you so much for sharing with everybody. I want to thank all those that you donated tonight. Every one of the questions came in. I want to share my appreciation. And hopefully we all find ourselves not attracted to someone that's narcissistic, trauma bond, that's toxic.
That's right. That's right.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much.
You.
Wishing you all a super duper wonderful evening. Be well.